Hi, I'm Scott Olson with FounderBuzz. I'm here today with Ed Boyajian with EnterpriseDB. Thanks for being with us today, Ed.
Hi, Scott. Glad to be here.
Great. So I always like to start this off with just a little bit about yourself, and if you could, say who you are and what do you do, that'd be a great way to kick it off.
Sure. Our company, EnterpriseDB, is the commercial company that brings to market the open source Postgres database. And so we've built a commercialized version of Postgres. Our particular product is called Postgres Plus, which is a superset of what the community would distribute as a pure community version. And very much like what you'd find at Red Hat with Red Hat Enterprise Linux, we have, our relationship to Postgres is very much like the Red Hat Enterprise Linux product is to the Linux community.
Okay.
And that's not a particular surprise since I came from Red Hat after about 7 years.
Taking that experience along with you. And
Exactly.
Certainly databases are a critical part of any enterprise's, core IT architecture. And so how have you seen the way that open source solutions are disrupting, what has traditionally been off-the-shelf database market?
Yeah. I think that industry, the database industry, is facing an extraordinary amount of transformation right now at a variety of levels. And I think a lot of what we're doing at EnterpriseDB and the growth we're seeing with Postgres, I think, is following a pattern that we saw at Red Hat with the adoption of Linux as an open source operating system alternative to Unix and other platforms, and even in that experience at Red Hat in particular, the JBoss open source project as an alternative to the WebSpheres and the WebLogics. And what attracted me to come and lead EnterpriseDB was what we were hearing for a long time at Red Hat from customers who were saying, look, you're helping me address my core spend issues in my infrastructure with Linux and middleware, but my big spend is database.
Right.
And I'm locked into one or two vendors, and I need to address that. What's available from an open source perspective to address that problem? And so we at EnterpriseDB have really started to tackle that, obviously in a fashion quite similar to the way Red Hat does in the other areas. But I think what's interesting about it is if you look at that database market, it's a $26 billion industry. And in fact, it's many times bigger than both operating system and middleware combined. And it's dominated by Oracle at 50% share, and Microsoft and IBM split, each do another 20 to 22, 23% apiece. So it's a very dense market that's where companies are kind of in tight control of a pretty big amount of budget spend that
Right.
that companies have. So
and with the database so mission critical, are you seeing that a company like yourself that provides the support and feed and carrying of an open source project just seems like it would be absolutely essential for people adopting that.
Yeah, it really is. Postgres is incredibly successful technology. It's been in an open source project form for 15 years. This is the 15-year anniversary of that project. And so it's very widely used and widely adopted, but I think we see patterns where it's adopted in more limited use cases. And I think largely because there hasn't been, until EnterpriseDB, took this on a global basis, there hasn't been that productization and that support model that really gives enterprises the kind of the security they need to have a traditional software vendor relationship with all the SLAs and support agreements that they would come to expect. So
Right.
We play a really important role in that ecosystem, I think, alongside the important work that the open source community does.
Right, that makes a lot of sense. And speaking of open source, we've actually had a couple good open source companies on FounderBuzz, including Xenos and Puppet Labs. And one of the things that I find very interesting is how companies make the decision to open source a software project. As these people are out there, they're creating something. How do you make that decision that this belongs in open source?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and I think particularly for the audience that you talk to, a lot, I think so much depends on what the capabilities of the core company are, and what the kind of the breadth of the technology is. And what I mean by that is, oftentimes open source projects, one of the great benefits of open sourcing any technology is that you can enlist a wider range of technical experts than you could afford to employ on your own. And in doing that, you can enhance your product at an extraordinary rate. You really can accelerate the development of that technology. But it all depends on your ability to bring others to your community. And so, I think the decision has to be born of your commitment from a business to, to building and working with a community. I think skills that relate to your ability to deal with a certain degree that, in a proprietary software company, they control everything they do. And there's a lot of security and comfort in that. I think there are a lot of limitations to that too.
Yeah.
And you have to be willing to relinquish some of that control in order to bring more value to your technology. So I think a lot of it has to do with an absolute amount of labor and skill you can bring to a given project. I do also think that some technologies lend themselves better to open sourcing, simply because they, infrastructure software, there's a lot of open source infrastructure software because it's so prolific.
Right.
After you get a server, the next thing on a server is next most prolific thing is a chip, and that's mostly Intel, I guess, and a little bit of AMD these days. And depending on who you talk to, I guess you throw IBM in there now too,
right.
And a little bit of Sun. But after you get past the chip, what's the next most prolific thing? An operating system. Really strong presence for open source. Next, some of the next most prolific things, middleware. You see that, big open source projects, and the next most prolific thing after that is database. And
so
if
you
you
kind of have an instant community of the people that need your software and actually can contribute to it.
That's exactly right. And if you look underneath those technologies, they're actually heavily standards based.
Yeah.
Was the origination of that. So so there's already a built-in broad base of technical expertise across a broader continuum. So if you're a company who has infrastructure-like technology, just by nature of its broad base of use, I think that lends itself to the buildup of a community. I think the more niche your application gets and the more specialized it gets, it's tougher to put community.
You won't be able to build that community around it.
It's tough. Yeah.
Well, certainly appreciate your time today, Ed, and thanks for sharing all of those insights.
Great. Good to talk, Scott. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Take care.